And then we're partnering with museums and kind of like-minded organizations around the country to try to advance our goals together. And then we'll be redoing our web presence. So thank you for being with us. And we want to invite you to join the Air Force Historical Foundation. You saw the logo that was up while you were waiting to come in. There's a link there. We'd love to have you as a member. We'd love to have you participate in the activities that we're taking on. And we'd love your suggestions on what we can do to try to make our organization more relevant to all airmen and guardians and people that are interested in air and space power history. So thanks for that. Pepe and his team led a book club last year that was focused on professional development for our intel professionals in the Air and Space Force. And they did a great job, and we're fortunate to have their technical help and know-how as we start our sessions here. More than that, we're fortunate to have Christina Olds join us today. And many of you have seen this book. Most everybody has heard of General Robin Olds. General Olds, I was in the 71st 3 times, which was General Olds' fighter squadron that he commanded, and I had the opportunity to meet him several times over the years. Christina, of course, knew him better than anybody and worked with a team to pull this book together from his notes, from interviews and talks with his friends. And we're really happy to have Christina with us. So Christina, we'll turn the floor over to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit, and then we'll start into questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this wonderful series. It's quite an honor to be the first book. And I just want to thank all of you for supporting my dad and his legacy the way it has been supported since the book came out 10 years ago. I'm sure he would be very humbled by knowing that this was going on in his honor. And I knew when I spent his last 6 months living with him, and I knew that I would end up pulling his book together for him because he just never got around to it. He wanted to be out with the guys. He would travel around the world wherever he was invited to pilot graduations, reunions, making speeches, visiting people all over the world. And he had a very hard time sitting in front of his computer. So when I was taking care of him, he told me he was really not happy with himself for not getting around to writing his book. And I told him, I said, "Don't worry, Daddy, I'll do it for you. I've always known I'd have to." And he said, "Are you sure? I've left you a mess." And I said, "Absolutely. I will take care of it for you." And it was definitely a process, a huge labor of love. It took me a year and a half, which actually sounds like a very short time to pull a book of this size together. But I spent every day 10, 12 hours a day. Toward the end was 14, 16 hours a day pulling it together. So it came out, I think, exactly when it needed to, and not a moment too soon, because I think his legacy and his influence is very valuable for our airmen all over the world now. I love visiting them where, when I visit bases everywhere, they've got his photo up in the squadron ops or in the squadron bar, or everybody knows about Robin Olds, which I think is just a magical, magical thing. There could be no more deserving man to have his legacy this large now. So thank you all.
Thank you. And I'll start us off. You covered this a little bit, but when you read the book, in places at least, it reads like a love letter to your dad. And the love that your dad had for you and that you had for him shine through all of it. How important was it for you to get this story right? And how hard was it to take his notes and the stories from his friends and the other help you got and turn it into a book that would be true to him, that would be kind of publicly attractive and would still hold true to the Air Force and the people that he knew?
Well, there's several answers to those many questions that you just posed. When I was traveling with him a lot in his last 10 years to air shows, speeches, gatherings all over the world, I noticed that he was always surrounded by pilots. There would be a circle around him like this, and then a circle behind them, and then a circle behind them. And it became very obvious to me that his stories needed to get out there. And a couple of the pilots would take me aside and say, "Please make him write his book." So I encouraged him, he started writing down notes in around 1985, and he just kept lots and lots of notes. And then he would put them in his computer and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit. And would send me, mail to me. I was in California at the time and he was in Colorado. He would mail me his latest edit. And I'd send it back. I'd mark them up and make suggestions. It was really good fun. But pretty quickly, I had an idea that I would end up pulling the whole thing together for him, because he just didn't want to sit still and do it. But his legacy, not only as a fighter pilot and as a leader, but as a father and as a dear friend, was so enormous that I really wanted to get the whole picture of this wonderful man put into a book that people could easily relate to. And the interesting thing is he was also quite, for a fighter pilot, he was a pretty humble guy. And he wrote his notes in third person. He was describing something that was separate from himself. He was describing the other guys in the flight or describing who he was with. And I kept encouraging him to write from the first person. And he kept saying, no, I don't want to. It doesn't feel right to put so much of myself into this story. He wanted to tell the story of everyone around him. So when he passed away, I worked on the proposal of the book for quite a while to find a publisher. And I sent in written in third person like he wanted. And the publisher came back and he said, I'm not getting it. And I said, well, I know why. There's only one way to do this book, and that's write it in the first person as an autobiography. And when I started writing it that way, and I started with the World War II chapter, because I heard him speak about that experience so many times in my life, that I just started writing as if I were Robin, and the whole thing started flowing from that point. So I think that the love that I had for him and the trust he had in me, because several people tried to get him to let them write his book. And he would say, no one's going to put words in my mouth. But he let me. He said he'd trust me to do it. So such an honor. I'm so glad I got it done for him.
Thank you very much. Pepe?
Christine, I got a quick question. Your father flew some of the greatest fighters in Air Force history, the P-51, P-38, and the F-4 among them. All your times with your dad, hearing all of his stories and all the time spent with them, which was his favorite fighter? Did he have a favorite fighter? Which one was it?
Well, I think each one that he was flying was his favorite at the time. And especially as the new ones came along and he jumped into one after the other, he loved them. He had a terrific love for his Mustangs in World War II. But I know he also loved the F-4. And probably the F-4 was his favorite because he got to do so much in it, although he was completely frustrated by not having guns on it. And he used to tell me, if I'd had guns on that F-4, I could have shot down 10 or 15 maybe, but they were dealing with the missiles that weren't working all the time. So I would say the F-4, and it was also his favorite just because of the command that when he was wing commander of the 8th Attack Fighter Wing flying the F-4, it all added up together.
Awesome. General Holmes, over to you, sir.
I'll build on that just a little bit. If he loved all his airplanes, and the F-4 was perhaps his favorite. I know there are a lot of assignments that he was very happy in and some that he weren't. All of us in the Air Force look for an opportunity to find jobs, that are a good fit for our skills and our personality and everything else. And I'm not sure there was ever a better fit between commander and time and unit than the time that Robin spent at Ubon with the Wolfpack, leading that organization. Was that his favorite? Was that his favorite time in the Air Force?
Yes, I would think so. Both from listening to him and then as an observer, and then connecting with a lot of the men who flew with him during that time. He was so loved, and he loved them so much. And that whole time was so intense and scary and dangerous and important. So yeah, he absolutely loved his time there. But more than anything, I think the cover of the book, this photograph on the cover of the book, was a photograph that sat over his mantle in his fireplace in his house for the rest of his life. And he told me that that was the proudest moment of his life, that being picked up by the young officers that flew with him, picked up and carried on their shoulders into the officers club, was a time that he just, his sense of pride, his sense of accomplishment, his sense of connection with his men was just so profound at that time that I knew that that had to be the cover of the book, because he told me it was his favorite moment. So I think being lifted on the shoulders of his men meant to my dad, that was his favorite moment, even more than flying the jet.
Wow. Okay, for everybody out there in Zoom land, if you have any questions, please go on chat and ask the questions, and we'll link you up to our screen and talk to Ms. Souls herself. So you have questions, please bring them forth. So I wait for questions, Christina. Your dad was known as a fighter pilot's fighter pilot. Yet in your book, he seemed to really relish his staff assignments. In chapter 16, the Phantom and the War, second and third pages provide an excellent strategic assessment of the Vietnam Wars appeared to him. And I think I'm just amazed at how much he just went into detail about strategic perspectives of warfare besides Vietnam. Is this an accurate assessment? I actually learned a lot from his staff assignments.
He did, but also prefacing that, my dad was a real student of history, and he was so well read in all of the wars of the past and all the tactics of the past. He studied everything very, very deeply. So he went into combat with the ancient idea in his mind of how things should look and how they could look based on different circumstances. And so his staff jobs also instructed him greatly, because he paid very close attention to everything. He was very studious. He never shirked from memorizing anything that was put in front of him that needed his attention. And at the staff level, especially, although he hated sitting behind a desk, that's well known, he got in a lot of trouble doing things just sitting behind a desk that probably his energy could have been used better out on the field. But he learned about people. And because when you're a fighter pilot and you're flying with other fighter pilots, what you know is the fighter pilots, and you know your ground crew. But it's a staff job that'll teach you what other people are like that are supporting the mission inside the base headquarters or inside the ops room, and how personalities can mesh together or not mesh together to get a job done. So he was a very, very observant person. So I think he was able to size people up very quickly and figure out where they fit in each job. And one of my favorite things that he talks about later in the book was when Tui Spots at the end of World War II told him, there are things he really needed to know if he was going to stay in the Air Force, and that there were 4 different personality types he'd run into: the me-firsters, the me-tours, the deadwood, and the dedicated. And he said, just be the dedicated, just focus on the mission, focus on what you have to do, and forget any other foolishness. So his staff jobs taught him a lot, definitely.
Okay, well, let's call on Mike Devine to ask his question. Mike, we'll take you off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. The question I have is, who inspired your father? Who did he look up to? I assume his father for one, but who else?
Oh my. Definitely his father, absolutely. But I'm not sure I ever heard him speak about, well, Eddie Rickenbacker definitely inspired him. I'm not sure I ever heard him say a person's name in that context, and I look up to him, he inspired my life, kind of thing, other than his father and the twinkle he'd get in his eye when he would talk about fellow fighter pilots, or Eddie Rickenbacker and the wonderful people he grew up around in his dad's house. So I would love to give you a definite answer for that, but I can't reach into my memory and find the name of anybody that he would call out as his inspiration.
Okay, thank you.
One thing we noticed about your dad time after time as he took command is he had an approach to doing that. He liked to be there early before everybody knew him. He liked to get around to all the different shops that he could get into. And, you know, he certainly learned a lot. And you talk about it in the book with advice from, as you talked about, from Tui Spots, from his dad, Jimmy Doolittle, and others. But it seemed like he also started learning from the guys toward the bottom of the chain, starting with his first crew chief on Scat One back, you know, in the UK. What do you think? What do you think the impact of that ability he had to connect with people? How important was that to, you know, being carried off the flight line on people's backs, that personal connection and his ability to do that?
Well, I would have to say that above and beyond his skill as a fighter pilot, his ability as a leader, his personal connections with people are why he's so loved. And I've heard the stories over and over and over and over again about how personable he was with his crews, with the ground crews, with the people he's flying with. He would talk to waiters in restaurants or find little children and take them on his knee and ask them what they were interested in and do you want to fly and things like that. He had a way of making the person he was speaking to feel like they were the most important person in the world. He would always take time for that connection. And especially at Ubon, he would go out on the tarmac at night and take a 6-pack of beer to the ground crew working on the jets. And he'd sit there and ask them about their families and where were they from and what did they need? And they didn't have to go through channels. They could just talk to him and tell him what they needed. And I think that what that does is it engenders a trust in a person. It engenders a desire to be around them because they're fun. And oh my God, he was so funny. The endless jokes. I can't even remember one joke, and he could tell 100 in a row. He just had quite an amazing person-to-person ability that I personally think was probably very, very rare in a warrior, really. So the juxtaposition of his fighting spirit and his machismo and his warrior ethos was with this sweet, personable, funny man. And that he was a very gentle man too, very gentle father. I think that was a magical thing you just don't see in many people. And so definitely that's, I think that's why he's so beloved.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another audience question from Nancy Putnam. Nancy, would you like to ask your question?
Can't hear Nancy.
There you go. Sorry, the button kept moving. Christina, it's a fantastic book. I read it when it first came out. My question is directed to you. You grew up in pretty, turbulent times in the 60s and 70s, had an amazing father who was well known, in kind of anti-war times. What was it like for you? Were you able to maintain your relationship through that? Was it ever difficult for you? Your love of him and your knowledge of his life comes through in the book, and it's fantastic. But this is a question more directed to you.
Oh, that's a very good question. I never, ever broke contact of any kind with my father. My sister had more of a difficult time with that because we definitely were in high school and in college, right in the anti-war time. But it never, being such an Air Force brat and growing up in the places I did and having a close relationship with my father, I never got the personal anti-war thing. And I went to Vassar College, which was a very liberal school at that time. And although it was a little shocking when I got there, I put my Air Force Academy banner up on my wall, and my roommate said, I think you should take that down. So I never felt separated from my dad. I never felt the need to get into big arguments with people because I understood both sides of it. I just thought, here was my father who was risking his life in the war, and he was doing what he was told to do and supposed to do. whereas all of our people here in America had no idea of really what was going on and what these people who were on the lines, what they were up against. So it was a very interesting time. And but I can say that it was also a lovely time with my dad, especially once he got home from Vietnam. And we had a bond that just grew and grew and grew once he got home. So I don't feel that it ever impacted me negatively at all.
You and I were classmates at Vassar.
Oh no.
And I was in the military, and I kept it really quiet, and I didn't know about your father till later.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I know a lot, and it's a wonderful book. It just
well, when we were in school, as you remember, it was all about being at Vassar. It was all about college. It was all about our friends and our studies. It wasn't really anything to do with the outside world, although we knew it was going on. You're just so insulated when you're on a college campus like that it never encroached upon my life with my family, and I would just go home on vacation and be right with them again. So it wasn't a problem. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Ma'am, we have another question from the audience. This is from Paul Hester. I'm unsure if it's General Hester. Sir, would you like to ask your question?
You have to unmute.
Since nothing heard, I am going to read the question for the moment. And it is, having been promoted to Brigadier General, he was sent to the Academy to inspire with his presence and his incredible personal history. How did he assess that time in his career?
Well, when he heard that he was going to be Commandant of Cadets of the Air Force Academy, he was at his job at Ubon as a fighter pilot. So you can imagine that really wasn't what he wanted to hear. He actually wanted to stay there another year and lead them, but he thought, Air Force Academy, what is a grizzled old fighter pilot going to do for these kids? He was very, very perplexed at why they were sending him there. But once he got there, and it was very immediate, because he had to shave off his mustache before he got there, but he arrived that first day and that first week, all of the kids were wearing fake mustaches, and they had painted 4 stars on his chair in his office as the MiGs, denoting the MiGs he'd shot down, knowing he'd have to fly that desk for 4 years. So his challenge was really with the superintendent and the dean and the upper officers who were trying to keep the Air Force Academy as a totally learning institution. And once he got with the kids, though, his job as Commandant of Cadets was he was responsible for the cadets, for their training, their military training, physical training, overall academics, military comportment, and he loved it. He absolutely loved those kids. And it took him maybe a month before he really, really got into it. And then we'd find him out in the field working out with them in Jacks Valley, or climbing a wall in the gym, or running around the field house with them. He loved being with the youngsters, and then, they looked up to him so much that he just really became a big kid while he was with them. So at the end of that assignment, he loved it so much. He spoke to me often about how he missed being around those guys. And the kids that were in those classes when he was there are many of them are my really close friends now. And they've all come together, and Robin was such an influence on their lives. They say, now, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that there were more generals out of those 4 classes than any other section of Air Force Academy classes before or since.
Thank you, ma'am. And then the next question from James Gardner, if you'd like to ask that.
Hi, Christina. How are you?
Hello.
It's very nice to meet you. The book your book Fighter Pilot is fabulous. It is an amazing book. I have the audio version, and the guy who reads it does a wonderful job. I just want to ask this question. You know, your dad he's a man who he's got humor, he's got intellect, he's brave, he's got incredible technical abilities. His instincts are so sharp. How would your dad's personality, who he became, how would it compare to your grandfather's? I know he died before you were born, but from what you've heard, how would their personalities have actually compared?
Well, I've researched a lot about my grandfather. I'm still working on a book about him. It's enormously complicated, so it's going to take me quite a while longer. And from what people have said about him, he was more strict. He was, although he was really fun to be around, he was also far more serious and very exacting as an officer. And so I think comparing the two is kind of impossible for me, because of course I can't talk about my grandfather in an intimate, personal way. But I think my dad was more fun-loving. He was more loved to do pranks, to be silly. He never really got that 7-year-old boy out of him. And my grandfather was incredibly serious, dedicated, everything was right on schedule, right on time. His staff were always held to the highest standards. So although my dad told me, he said, "Oh, you would have adored your grandfather and he would have adored you." So I'm sure he was also a wonderful person, but I've just heard that he was quite strict.
Thank you very much.
And ma'am, for a slight change of pace, we actually have a couple of comments from the audience. The first would be from Steve Mosier. Steve, if you're available.
Yes, I'm here.
Sir, would you like to add your comment?
Yeah, I would like to say that I only met your dad once. He had just retired, and it was his first time back on an air base to a dining out. And it was a crowd of students, just like the guys he loved to be around. And the only thing I can say, he was a Viking. He was bigger than anybody has ever been. He held the room, and I remember him raging almost about why he didn't have a gun in his goddamn F4. But it was inspirational, and it was I served in his wing shortly after he left, and what he left behind was a reputation without equal, period.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right.
And I'm going to interrupt here for a second to say I served under Steve Mosier at Holloman in the 49th Wing. He was my vice commander and had a great impact on my life. It's great to see you, Steve.
Same here, Mike.
Wonderful. And ma'am, next, Dee Whitcomb would like to tell a story from the Air Force Academy days.
Oh, good. I love those.
Can you hear me? You got me on there?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, yeah. Well, Christina, you're absolutely right. When your dad arrived, he stood up on the staff tower and gave the entire cadet wing the finger. And we knew there was a new sheriff in town right there on the spot. And in that 3 minutes occurrence, we changed the academy entire modus to a school for combat aviators. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. And then you mentioned that I don't know what the numbers are on general officers, but I know that there were, I think, 4 in the first class that he graduated. And that was class of 68. And 3 of those guys at the same time were combatant commanders. Transcom, SOCOM, Northcom. So they had tremendous influence. And I think all 3 of those guys were actually in their jobs on 911. So that just tells you the impact of all that. But I would like to share a personal vignette from my first degree year in the fall of '68. I was going through T-41 training, and your father used to have these Friday evening little get-togethers at his house for the various squadrons of first-classmen. And the evening that my squadron, 7th Squadron, was due to come over, it was a casual thing. You show up whatever you're wearing, and the general's going to help us learn how to be more socially adept, I guess. And it was a great time. But that day, I had late flying. And so I show up at the party there, and I'm in my flight suit, and everybody else is in civilian clothes. And the general sees me, and he says, "Hey, Whitcomb, how come you're in your flight suit?" And I said, "Well, sir, I just came right from the flight line. I had late flying." And he goes, "Oh, well, great. How's the program going?" And I said, "Sir, it's going great. I absolutely love it. It's wonderful. And it's what I want to be." And he goes, "Well, where are you in the program?" And I said, "Well, sir, I had my so-and-so flight today, and it was my first solo. Today was my first solo." And he said, "We have to celebrate this moment." So he went into his room, and he came back out.
And brought you that, I know this story, yes.
And he had a scarf, and one of his scarves, he put it around my neck. This is it. And it reeked of whiskey and cigars. And then he said, "Here's to our newest wolf cub." And I got to tell you, at that moment, if he'd have told me to get in my T-41 and fly to Hanoi, I'd have been airborne in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I have never, never, never forgotten that in my entire life.
That's such a wonderful story. And I have heard it before. I think I heard you tell it someplace.
Well, I think I bumped into you at the dedication here at the Academy a few months ago and mentioned that story. But when I saw you were going to be on today, I had to fish out that old scarf.
Wow.
And share that moment.
What a treasure.
It is a treasure, you betcha. He was a great man.
Yes, definitely was.
Thank you. And ma'am, the next question is from Rock Mendenhall. If you would like to ask that. Okay.
Hello, Christina. What was the largest obstacle, if any, authoring the book? And what was the most enjoyable aspect of authoring your dad's story?
First of all, the most enjoyable was just getting it done, was knowing that I was getting it done for him. And that drove me every single day to keep working and keep working and keep working, because, well, not only had I promised him I'd do it, but so many people were waiting for his stories. And so it was a really immersive, enjoyable time for me, although it was tremendous hard work too. I just felt very, very full of life and very happy and very dedicated and very committed to what I was doing. So that gave me a lot of joy. The challenge was the same. It was the hours I was putting in. I was living alone at that time, and I had to get friends to come get me twice a week to go out for a walk, to make me leave the chair, make me leave. So the most challenging thing was the time frame, the deadline I had given my editor, telling him, "Oh, I'll get this book done by December 1st. No problem." Oh my gosh, I should never have done that. I'm glad I did now, because it got done. I basically wrote the whole book in 1 year, 11 months. Started on January 1st, 2008. And December 1st, pressed the button on send on my computer. So that was a tremendous, tremendous challenge. It was difficult. I was pretty not well physically when it was finally done, and it took me several months to get my health back. But you know, I'd do it all over again for him. Definitely would.
Thank you. That was remarkable to write a book in 11 months. And I know all of us appreciate your dad's story very much. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here with one, and I'm going to call on Bill Stramberg. But Christina, in the book, you talk about Robin's crew chief on his P-51, and it's Sergeant Glenn Wold, I think, Wold. And Bill says he met him and has a question for you. Bill, are you up?
Yes, I am. I had a chance to show he and your dad around the Udvar Hazy Center here in Virginia. Your dad's knees were getting a little creaky like some of us are, but they had a great interaction and were telling stories left and right. I wished I'd had a recorder to grab some of these things. Did he retain, it appeared he had that relationship throughout his entire life from World War II on. Can you talk a little bit about that and how he appreciated that?
Oh, yes.
Care of his planes.
He was so close to all of the members of the 434th Squadron throughout his life, and they all had reunions every year wherever they could around the country to get together. But I know that his relationship with Glenn was really special, and Glenn was also the person who did all the nose art and wrote scat on all the airplanes.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was his crew chief was his artist. And he just stayed tremendously close to all of the guys in the 434th, the ground crew and the pilots. And, 25 pilots went over and only 9 came home. So you can imagine the times they had together for that year over in England.
Thanks for that.
Yes, ma'am. Our next question is from Bruce. If Bruce would like to ask his.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, Christina. I was lucky enough to be at the Academy when your dad was Commandant, but even more lucky to score a backseat ride in the T-33 with him. And before we left, he briefed me that you and the rest of the family were up skiing and that we were going to go up and pay you a visit. So I've always wondered if you saw the low pass as we came by, because it was an awesome sight from inside the airplane.
Yes, I do remember seeing an aircraft or two come over when we were skiing. He loved to do that. And in fact, we used to go up to a ranch in Wyoming every summer, and Daddy would come in whenever he could get off of work, but we'd be there for almost a month in August. And I'll never forget sitting on the edge of a lake once in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I heard this roar, and all of a sudden, over the top of the trees behind us came this F4, and right across, right above the level of the lake, and then went up a canyon on the other side. And apparently everyone around there in Jackson Hole heard it too, but he was just saying, hi family, how are you doing? Wish I could be there with you, but this is as close as I can get. He loved doing that.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I sure enjoyed the book.
You get in a lot of trouble for doing that today. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My mother, in fact, a little story. My mother was an actress in the 40s, and she was filming a Western out in Arizona. And apparently he was flying P-80s then, and he went out and he buzzed the film set. And it wasn't a very good thing because the horses bolted. Donkeys, kicked off their tethers and ran away. Dust filled all the cameras, and it was quite a scandal. But that didn't stop him.
That's great. Nope, never did.
Nope.
Well, thanks.
And ma'am, the next question is from Don. Don, over to you. We can't hear you, sir.
There we go. Thank you very much for your book, Christina. I read your book about a year ago. I'm writing a book of my own on Captain Joseph McConnell, who was the top ace of the Korean War. And I know that your dad really wanted to get into combat in Korea, but your mom, as I understand it, pulled some strings so that he would not go to Korea. Tell us a little bit about that and the disappointment that your dad felt.
Well, of course, he wanted to go to Korea badly. He wanted to fly combat again. But for most of his life, he blamed his squadron commander at the time. I think he was at Pittsburgh. Yeah, because I was born in New York City. It was right in that time, 1952. And he his squadron commander said to him, "I'm not getting to go to Korea, so neither are you." And he was very upset and angry about that. And he didn't find out until I think it was in the mid 1980s from somebody who had actually worked in personnel in the Pentagon, who said, "Robin, you need to know the reason you didn't go to Korea was your wife pulled strings." She was in one of the first TV shows that was being filmed in New York City. And the producer of the show was Lawrence Rockefeller, who was a family friend. And she went to Lawrence and said, "I won't be in your series if my husband gets sent to Korea." So Lawrence Rockefeller went to the Pentagon and pulled strings, and they pulled his orders. He was so surprised. And then my dad felt so bad for blaming his squadron commander all those years.
Thank you very much. And then, ma'am, one more question from the audience. I believe this one is from KB. KB, would you like to ask your question?
I'm going to assume that KB hears me. I'm Keith Billiot. Thank you for your time, ma'am. And my question, I'm a recent graduate of the Academy, graduated in 2020. And considering everything going on in the world today, if your dad was back in the seat as commandant or back in command within the Air Force, what do you think he would do or say to encourage or assure or to lead as he did in a current context for our airmen and junior officers?
Oh boy, I was thinking earlier today, I hope nobody asked me this question. I can only imagine what he would have done now. The climate is completely different than it was then, but he still, as a commanding officer, would be all about the mission and all about teamwork and all about the men and women of the Air Force giving their all to pull together to accomplish the mission. I can't speak to what he would think about what's going on right now, but I know that he was so committed as a commanding officer. He would definitely make sure his highest priority would be that his team was safe, that it would go and accomplish the mission and come back safely. So he would definitely be keeping everybody together and focused on accomplishing what they had to accomplish, but taking care of each other at the same time.
Thank you.
Hey, Christina, Pepe here again. As an intel professional, I was pleased to see how much your dad talked about intel being the nerve center at the ATAC fighter wing while it was going on in the war. Going back and do out that chart about how important intel was. But the 8th is also one of the first wings in Vietnam to go from low to medium altitude to high altitude bombing from fighters. And seemed to do a whole lot of studying about the threat while he was over there. A lot of attention to detail you don't see from some commanders. Was that something that he always that detail oriented as a career in life? And where did he get that dedication from to be that oriented towards that much detail within the units?
I think it definitely started in childhood. He was a tremendous reader, very sort of classically educated, and read everything that was put in front of him and dove deep into the things that fascinated him, and grew with a love of maps that was really intense through his life, and a collection of books that I still have many of his books. And he was such a student of in a way kind of a Renaissance man, because he studied. He was very aware of all of the statistics that were put in front of him, all the photographs, all the intel that came in. This is why he had such a hard time at U-Bahn in the beginning, because their intel wasn't accurate in the beginning. And he really pulled the guys together to have a tactics conference and discuss, hey, what's real and what isn't real? We need to get together and figure out what's really happening here. But it was part of his makeup. He was really a student of history and a student of poetry and literature, and just anything that fascinated him, he learned everything he could about it. And that absolutely carried through in his appreciation for Intel.
Back to you, TL.
Go ahead, Pepe.
Oh, sorry, go back to you, sir. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So one of the places that shines through in the book is the talk about the preparation and the execution of Operation Bolo, Christina. And the airmen, the generation of young airmen today spent the last 20 years fighting in an environment in the air where we could pretty much go where we wanted to and do what we wanted to do. Now, your dad's experiences in World War II and in Vietnam, where he had to fight, every second for his airspace and for the people that he was protecting, and to get bombers across the target with the real chance of not making it home or having friends not make it home, is different than the experience that we've lived through. But we're returning to that environment when we talk about competition with great powers again. Your dad took a problem that appeared to be unsolvable and then sat down with his folks and studied and found a way to get after it in Bolo. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Well, Bolo, and his right-hand man in that was J.B. Stone. And Daddy told me that they first came up with the idea sitting in the officers club one night and just discussing, now, how do we get those MiGs up? Because the MiGs wouldn't come up after the F4s. They would easily come up after the 105s, but they turned tail and ran. And so the idea started, I think they started talking about it. What can we do to lure them up? What's a Trojan horse kind of thing we can do to trick them into coming up? And that's what started the whole discussion and the whole idea about Bolo and disguising the F4s as if they were 105s. And it certainly worked, certainly worked. And I mean, what an operation that turned out to be.
Thank you. Pepe?
Go
ahead, TL.
One that I will read from the field from Ron R. is he asks, when I was a student at ACSC, he was asked if he did a touch and go in Hanoi. He smiled and said that he would not confirm or deny that. Do you have anything to add to that by chance?
What I can add to that is that it's a great myth. It's a wonderful myth. I don't know what really happened. I do know that that myth is out there that he did a touch and go on Hanoi, but I also know that I kind of doubt my dad would have taken that much of a risk. And also in those days, there were so many eyes watching things like that it would have been reported as fact if he actually did it. I think it's a great sort of myth that adds to his whole personality. But I kind of doubt that it actually happened, for me anyway. I just think I'm not sure he would have taken that risk.
Thank you, ma'am. And Ron, I didn't mean to speak for you if you wanted to add anything to that question. Okay. The next question is from Ryan Jackson.
Am I unmuted?
Loud and clear.
Cool. Awesome. Christina, I'd love to say thank you so much. I've read this book probably about 3 times. Also, it feels kind of cool because I'm pretty sure I'm the youngest person on here, kind of thing. I was just asking, I know that during World War II, whenever he was in London, he came very close to buying a suit of armor in the antique shop from the old man. And the next morning, whenever he went to go to put some money down on it, the shop had been blown in by a bomb. Did he ever get a suit of armor later in life?
No. And that story, he told me that story so many times as I was growing up. I remember when I was 6 years old, when he first told me the story, and he was very teary-eyed when he spoke about it. But it was not for the loss of the suit of armor. It was for the loss of that wonderful man in the shop. And that impacted him so deeply, how quickly life can go away from all of us, and how we have to grab opportunities. And it also just really underscored the terrible bombing that was going on in London then. And he was so emotional about that time over there that compelled me to write that chapter first, because I remembered his story so vividly of talking about that armor. He spoke about it often. I wish I'd gotten that armor, but he never did. We never had one in the house. Never, ever. I think that anything that he would have found from then would have been a poor replacement.
That's very nice. Thank you for that. Could I possibly add a second comment? I'm not hearing no.
Please feel free.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I graduated high school not too long ago, and in high school, I took a digital media class where I was supposed to design a book cover, and this was my favorite book, still is. And I decided to make my own cover for the book, and I chose a picture of him with, I believe it was with Scat 6, and I did that as just because it was closer to my age, and I love all the World War II aviation stuff. I find that to be the most fascinating time. And so I picked that image, I colorized it just to change it up a little bit. In my cover, it looked great. And I don't know what I got on the project, what my grade was, but I was very proud of it. And just recently, a few months ago, I was looking at it. After reading the book for like the third time, I was looking at the actual cover, and I was like, I understand why it is that picture now, and especially with today, with it being his time in Vietnam, since this isn't a book about a young fighter pilot just going off and having his time whenever he's young. And this is also about fighter pilot that as he gets older and he has his command. And so this is like, that was his best time, was whenever he was in charge of his wolf pack. And so I understand why that was the cover picture.
Yeah, it was a very deliberate choice of that photograph when he told me that was his proudest moment. He loved that moment more than he loved any and all of the airplanes put together.
That's very nice. Thank you.
And ma'am, I think there might be another observation from James and Kelly Gardner.
Hi, Christina again. Hold on one second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. My mom and my grandfather were both in the Royal Air Force, and my mom spent much of that time in London. And of course, the bombing was terrible. When you in your book, when you talk about your dad's visits to London, in great detail. Of course, the antique shop was an amazing story. I could almost taste the cup of tea. And it was just so heartwarming for me, knowing that that's where my mom and my grandparents lived, and the descriptions and his admiration for the English people. It was just so clear that he was identifying what they were going through then.
He loved the English people. He loved the people of Great Britain immensely. And as a child, his favorite book, and I still have it, was The Knights of the Round Table. And I think that influenced him tremendously in his own sense of honor, his own sense of duty, and his own love of the whole history of England. Well, the whole history of Europe. He knew it all. He could sit and recite all the kings in order of every country. And he could recite all the pharaohs of Egypt in order. He was such a student. But England was definitely his favorite place. And every time he went back over the years, he would say, "Oh, honey, you have to come with me." And I did go back with him to Duxford, and just sitting in the Eagle Pub in Cambridge, where all the guys signed the walls and signed the ceilings. Just being there with him, he looked completely at home when he was in England, any place there. And the RAF still loves him. My daughter and I visited Lossiemouth in Scotland, where RAF Squadron 1 is, just a few years ago. We were invited over because they have the Robin Olds bar in their hangar right above the Typhoons on the floor. And it's fantastic. And they still have all of his diaries there and all the records of when he was commander of Squadron 1 for that 1 year after World War II. So yes, England, absolutely. Loved it, loved it.
Thank you. It beautifully written. It transported me to London in 1944. It was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And ma'am, the next question is from Laura Nielsen, and she asked for us to read it for her. She says, your father superbly walked the tightrope of breaking rules without getting into serious trouble. Do you think he recognized this as a unique talent of his, or would he encourage others to push the boundaries and follow in that path?
Well, he always pushed people to push the envelope, to push boundaries, to do what they could to have fun. And one of the great things about him was here was a man who was as serious as he was so playful, and he loved to play. And he wanted all the guys that were with him to know how to play, whether that was mud wrestling during, crazy nights in the O Club, or three-legged races, or dressing up in costumes. He wanted people. He really believed that part of life is so serious and it's so difficult at times that that we need to know how to play. We need to know when to let go, when to be silly. That if we can be playful with our friends and our family and our coworkers, it makes life so much more pleasant than being serious all the time. It also gives you kind of a situational awareness of other people's personalities. And it's just really, it was always a joy to him to draw people out that were being serious. Well, of course, they'd be the ones he'd make get up on stage and sing right along with him. So being playful was a huge part of his personality. And of course, as a father, you can imagine how wonderful that was.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think I see Wayne and Brenda down there. Hi, guys.
I'm sure you have fans joining you. And that was thanks so much for that last comment. I think that really helps understand your dad's personality, that emphasis on play and that desire to teach everybody to do it. That was really great. Thanks. Kind of along that line, as we come up toward the end of an hour, what's the best story that didn't make it into the book and why?
Oh, no, there are too many. Oh, no. I cannot possibly pick one, really. There are just so many. I got over 24 stories from the Air Force Academy guys. And I felt so sorry that I had to edit that chapter down. So there are really only 4, 5, or 6 stories. But there are so many great ones. And what's really fun for me in all the traveling I do, wherever I go, no matter where I am, when I run into people who know my dad or knew him, and they say, Christina, I need to tell you about the night that he blah, 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 blah. Actually, I can tell one story because I had a personal experience with this one. This kind of sums him up. He's 84 years old. I'm taking care of him, living with him for the last 6 months of his life. I'm paying all the bills. I'm doing the grocery shopping. I'm cooking him food. We're watching reruns of MASH every night. And this bill kept coming in every month after month from the Lowry Air Force Base Officers Club for $627. And I'd say, Daddy, we need to pay this. No, just ignore that. We don't need to pay that. Okay. I thought, well, it's a mistake. So I'd put it aside. And the next month, the bill would come back in. They still owed $627. And I said, come on, we have got to pay this bill. They're going to, it's not going to be good if this is left unpaid. And he said, no, honey, don't pay it. It's ridiculous. I don't need to pay it because it was their fault. I said, what was their fault? Well, he'd been at a reunion down at Lowry, a couple of years prior to that. So he was 81 or 82 years old. And it was in the middle of winter. And all the guys were in the officers club having a great time and singing and old fighter pilot songs and telling jokes and telling stories. And it went really late at night. It went so late that and the club ended up turning off the lights and they turned off the heat, trying to get the guys to leave. And they got colder and colder. And so what they did was they when all the lights went out and everything was cold, they dragged the furniture of the club out onto the lawn and set it on fire, and had a bonfire to keep warm and keep partying around it. And the $627 was for the furniture of the Lowry Air Force Base Club. So there's a story, an untold story for you.
That's a great one. Thanks.
Typical, very typical of him. I think he probably was very hard to say no to, once he got going on his shenanigans. I can't imagine anybody trying to control him or stop him from, going for the maximum fun possible. And he loved to sing. He had a beautiful singing voice. He and Chappie James used to sing together all the time. That was remarkable harmony.
Did he ever pay the bill?
I did. I did.
Well, I think on that one we have to ask one last question. That was awesome. And Officer Do Not Burn Furniture plays. Go out to the XO clubs.
Yeah, and I can see two young men in their flight suits down on the videos here, and I want you guys to not be unduly influenced by any of these shenanigans. You have to do your job now, right? Just play just a little bit. All right.
One last question. What words of wisdom do you think your dad would have for the airmen serving now in 2022?
I think it'd be the same as he always did. So obey your commanding officer, attend to the mission, accomplish the mission, take to the best of your ability, take care of each other, and bring the team home safely. Would be that same lesson.
Awesome. Mission first. General Holmes, sir, any closing comments from you, boss?
Christina, we did have a question from somebody out there that hasn't read the book that said, where can they buy it that's not Amazon?
Oh, it's in Barnes and Noble. It's in all the regular bookstores. And if they don't have it in stock, then that bookstore will order it easily for the person. It's also in Air Museum book gift shops and everything. So yeah, Barnes and Noble can easily order it.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. It's an amazing story. You tell it very well. The book is talked about across the Air Force, and we picked it on purpose for our first book because it's a great introduction to reading and talking about books. We'll be back in a couple of months with another book. And, we hope you can come back and join us. We hope you will consider becoming a part of the Air Force Historical Foundation. And one more time, I want to thank everybody that spent their time tonight to join us for the book club. And we hope that you will join us at the Air Force Historical Foundation. And again, we want your help and we want your ideas. So Christina, do you have anything you'd like to close with?
No, what I wanted to say is one of the magical things about this book is it's very readable for youngsters too. And I have met several young teenagers who said they've been so inspired by it that they joined the Air Force and they have become fighter pilots since reading it.
Send it to your grandson.
We have a high school senior that just graduated. He's considering that.
Okay, and then finally, thanks to Pepe and the tech team. Pepe and South, Death. Anybody else have anything to add?
We're going to go,
Christina.
Sir.
Thank you all. Thanks a lot. This was great. And I can't wait to join the foundation and also participate in all of your book clubs going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll ask the tech team to take everybody off mute for 1 second so that we can all just join in a thank you to Christina. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. We love you.
I love all you guys too. Thank you so much. This was fun. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.